in previous discussions, said that your career was somewhat random and unplanned. Can you tell us a bit about your journey?
To be able to have somebody who can really listen to me, who I can be vulnerable with, who I can share my challenges and the problems with, and they can really help me work through that has been so helpful at those sort of moments of transition.
Moving on from coaching to leadership, maybe tell us a few things that you've learned in your time as a leader that have stuck with you.
There should be diversity, because you can't run a business all in one way. And then you just need to bring that diversity in other ways. There's no one way of solving a problem. You need the different ways of thinking about it, approaching it.
Have you got any tips and hacks or rules in some respect that you follow now when trying to ensure that you are hiring the right person, even though we know if we get it 8 times out of 10 right, it's probably not too bad?
It's one of the most important things that we say to people is connect to people on LinkedIn, people that you'd be interested in having a coffee with, and just ask them if they've got time for 20-minute virtual conversations. Because actually people, as you say, they want to help, they want to give advice. And
I had the support, the hierarchy, the structures, the money to go and do some big changes whilst sort of acting on the edges and in a really dynamic and exciting way.
Shonagh, good afternoon. Thanks
Hi.
for coming along. As a starting point, you, in previous discussions, said that your career was somewhat random and unplanned. Can you tell us a bit about your journey, please?
Slightly harsh when I hear it like that, but probably very fair. It was completely unplanned right from the beginning. So I studied biology at university and was always really jealous of those people that knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be doctors and vets and the like. And I just didn't know what I wanted to do, but quite quickly fell into my studies, really enjoyed it, and had these sort of visions of becoming something in sort of médecine sans frontières or something. So I sort of spent all my days in the labs and got myself a PhD place at the end of university. And then my PhD was delayed by a year, which sort of threw me a bit of a loop. And obviously all the good jobs with all the different sort of firms have gone with the milk round. So I sort of left there sort of seeing what was out there. And I came across this graduate training scheme that was being advertised 1 year for a new business that was basically 2 gentlemen that were buying underperforming businesses and turning them around. And so I thought, great, it's a year. I'll go and get some business skills. At the end of it, I'll have something a bit different, go back and do my PhD and go back out into the world. And within about 2-3 months of being in this business, I completely fallen in love with it. And I ditched the PhD and sort of went from there. So it really was starting in that vein. And then I did another crazy thing. I decided I wanted to sail around the world and signed up for a boat race. So that was sort of the next departure from my career as I went off and did that. Came back, spoke to some headhunters, and they were like, "You've got a really interesting career and really interesting things. We have no idea who you've worked for. Go and get a big name on your CV and come back and see us in 2 years' time." So I went out, got myself in a job in a big FTSE 100 and thought I'd be there for 2 years, get the skills. 7 years later, I finally decided it was time to move on and go back out into the world. And I thought I wanted to go and learn about businesses and go and see different leadership styles, different teams, different industries, different companies. So I thought consultancy would be a really good idea for me. So I had an opportunity to go and join one of the big consultancy firms, and then thought, actually, I want to do this myself and do it, have more autonomy. So I made the slightly unusual decision to walk away from that offer and set up with a friend of mine who was leaving a business at the same time, and went out into the world with them, set up a global consultancy firm, had a lot of fun. But 5 years later, was really missing being part of that sort of team permanently, seeing the outcomes of your decision, getting to see whether or not what you decided to do was the right thing. And out of the blue, a call came through from a headhunter saying, "We've got this job, we're looking for someone to come in and run this business." And it just seemed perfect. So off I went and did that. And did that for a number of years. And it just came to a natural end of a cycle. And I sort of went out into the world and did some consultancy work whilst I was like thinking about the next thing. And then a friend of mine had set up a business and was wanting some advisory work. So I went and did that for him. He was like, actually, I really want you to come and work in this full time. So I joined as Chief Operational Officer and have been there ever since. So yeah, it's been some weird and wonderful turns and definitely unusual.
Brilliant. And have there been any sort of key or pivotal moments that stand out to you in that time?
I think, yes, I think there was sort of obviously plans going awry. So I know I had this big plan of what I was going to do. I'd worked really hard to go and get the PhD, and that completely faltered. So I think that was the first sort of understanding that things don't always go as planned and sort of deciding how you're going to respond to that and moving forward. And then, a call out the blue for a job that sounded amazing was obviously also another kind of real pivotal moment.
Mm.
Yeah, I think they're probably the two big ones, the big obvious ones that I would take away.
Have you, because in that journey you've shown amazing adaptability to kind of be, I don't know, finance, COO, consulting, different
Mm.
kind of facets. For you, is that something about your personality that you kind of go, actually, I want to try something different? I don't just want to be taking a classic finance route to a CFO.
Yeah.
You've always looked for that? Or is that something that just, as you say, was maybe a little bit more unplanned, but actually are you kind of pleased that it's happened as it happened in this way and you've got that breadth now?
I think so. I think actually the first time I went into this turnaround, we'd originally been told that you could go in and, you're going to do 3 rotations over the course of the year, which I thought would be great. I guess some like marketing, some sales, etc. But actually during the interview process, the 2 gentlemen that were had bought the company, they talked about their big plans for this organisation. They were going to go out and raise some money. They were going to do some mergers and acquisitions. They were going to expand internationally. And I wrote them a letter. But I decided to stay. I wrote them a letter and said, look, during this interview process, you said that there's some really cool stuff you wanted to go and do. And I'd love to be part of that. I mean, that'd be really exciting. So obviously I'll do my day job. But if I could be part of that, out of hours and take on the extra work, I'd really love to be involved. And very quickly, they took me off the graduate scheme, essentially, and I ended up working directly for them. And I just got to see this breadth of a business. I was involved in everything they got involved in. And so I never really did that thing which most people do, which is choose a discipline and get really good at it. I was never just sales or marketing or operations. Right from day one, I had this very holistic view of an organization. And I loved that way it sort of lived and breathed and how it impacted different elements and how something over here would affect something over there. And I loved it. It was like a real complex puzzle that I could sort of see literally breathing. And so I've always wanted that and I've always sought that. And definitely in the middle of my career, I'd have really difficult conversations with headhunters because they'd be like, but we're looking for someone that does this and you don't really, you're much broader than that. And they didn't know how to place me. They didn't know what I looked like. And I think what's so interesting is when you come later in your career, that's exactly what people want. When they want that breadth, they want that experience and understanding. But I really struggled in the middle part of my career to find my place. But also I think what's true is I get bored quite easily. I'll always say I'm not a maintainer. Don't get me to maintain anything. But if you want to challenge me new, you've got, I come alive with the words, we've got a problem. So yeah, I think there's probably 2 elements to that.
Now also you've a executive coaching part to your career. Out of interest, how have coaches and mentors helped you over the years?
A lot. There's been so many times in my life when either somebody has given me great advice or really helped me solve a problem within the organization, or seen a pathway to what comes next. And also, just having really good people around you and seeing how they work is not a formal mentoring or coaching relationship, but it just makes all the difference. But in terms of coaching, that's been transformational. So for me, to be able to have somebody who can really listen to me, who I can be vulnerable with, who I can share my challenges and the problems with, and they can really help me work through that has been so helpful at those sort of moments of transition. So when you're trying to get a new job, when you're launching into a new business, or certainly when you get to that sort of very senior roles when it's much more lonely. It's a very different skill set to perhaps what you've been doing before. It's been transformational, and that was very much part of why I wanted to become an executive coach, because if I look back at my career, some of the proudest moments of when I've seen teams really come together and deliver, or seen a transformation on someone that was perhaps on, really difficult ground at work, and then they're suddenly the person that everyone's trying to poach. And so to see those sort of transformations has been magical, and to be able to be part of that would be, so satisfying and enjoyable. So, yeah.
See, it seems to be a key theme of successful C-suite individuals that we meet, that they have had a great mentor at some point, and it's a common sort of piece of feedback or advice that you give to aspiring C-suite members is, look, I think if you haven't got something already, you should get some
Yeah.
form of mentor or coaching. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on advice for people seeking out someone, or how they should go about it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, obviously I do, given what I do, but I just think it makes such a difference. And I think it makes a difference to the individual, but also the organization. And I think that those relationships can be so rewarding for everybody. And so for me, it's about finding somebody that you really get. I think it's about finding somebody that understands where you are and what you're trying to do, and who you have really great chemistry with, and who you can be vulnerable with and open and honest. And that doesn't come around very easily sometimes. I've had some terrible coaches, or coaches I've had chemistry sessions with, and I'm like, oh, this is not a good idea at all. But when it works, it's magical. And I find that on both sides, both as someone that's had a coach that's really helped me, but also to be the person that's helping somebody else go through those moments of transition, or is sitting in quite a lonely seat as a leader, and needs to, has so much responsibility on their shoulders, both from above, maybe shareholders, or and the team beneath them, and doesn't have anywhere else to necessarily sort of have those conversations that really help. And to have someone that listens to you for, 90 minutes and it's all about you. I mean, how often does that happen? It never. So I think even just the process of talking can actually mean you can work it out yourself sometimes. But just to give yourself that space to do that is really important.
Perhaps for people that don't know this because they haven't studied, they don't know the difference between mentoring, coaching, therapy, you could just give people a sense of maybe are there different scenarios where a mentor is the right thing, and then there's other scenarios where maybe an executive coach is a more appropriate fit, and then there's clearly areas that go into therapy, and I know you've married a therapist, so you know these things as well. So if you could just kind of talk us through what they are actually in effect, and maybe where the scenarios fit well.
Yeah, so a mentor, the way I'd say a mentor is somebody that has experience perhaps in what you're trying to work through, and can give advice and direction. So I think that's really helpful at the sort of the beginning of your career when you're trying to work through things. It's really helpful to have different scenarios. Perhaps you haven't got the experience yourself to understand how you might work that through. So I think that's really very helpful. And I think also throughout your career, having someone that's done there, been there, can give you some advice, give you some examples, can perhaps bounce some ideas off you. That's really, valuable stuff. A coach for me is more about when they're helping you find the solutions from inside yourself. So only you know everything you're dealing with. Only you know all the different elements that are involved, how you're really feeling. And so it's much better when you'll always follow the advice of yourself. If someone gives you some advice, you might go, yeah, I'm not going to do that. But if you have the advice yourself, you're going to go and follow it through. So it's about finding those solutions for you. That means you're going to want to carry that through and follow on, and to really help you understand the landscape and the feelings you're going through and what you want to go and do about it. So for me, a coach is about getting deep and understanding where you're at, why you're doing, what you want to get to, but also what's stopping you and how you can perhaps work through those things to do it differently or try some new things. And so for me, a coach is really helpful when it's new and different, but also when you're struggling to work through something in a moment and you need some help and support to go through it.
Yeah.
I think it's always better with two, isn't it? I think, whether that's a friend or a partner or a colleague, I think someone there to bounce ideas off of and work things through and get some answers is really helpful.
Yeah. And we didn't talk about therapy there, but therapy,
No,
I guess,
sorry.
generally is that point when you might be in a coaching conversation, but actually there's something else that
Yes.
isn't really something you should be exploring with your coach, and it's very deep and very personal.
Yeah.
And that is something that's parked and taken in a more professional therapy context as well.
Yeah.
But there's definitely, I think, and why I think it's really interesting, I think there's a massive misconception sometimes, as everyone's a coach now on LinkedIn.
Yep.
We've talked about it before. Those people often aren't coaches. They are people that are following a very pre-prescribed model to offer a solution, but it's not really executive coaching. Maybe it is coaching, but it's a very formulaic structure. But clearly you've obviously gone through the training to be an executive coach and practice those different styles and
Yeah.
things that make a difference.
Exactly. I think because nothing, I think each situation is unique. So you need to understand that and explore it. And I think one tool doesn't fit all. So you need to have that ability to bring the tool that works best for that individual and explore different ways of doing it. And really understand that it's not about what you think and how you would do it. It's about what the person you're working with would want and need, and exploring it in that way. I think mentoring can be very directive. And I think a lot of coaches could also be thinking they're coaching, but they're actually just telling you what to go and do. And that's not coaching. So, and that's why I think finding the right coach is, an exploration. You should go and meet loads of different people and have some conversations because they don't have the same style. They don't have the same way of doing it. They like working with different kinds of people. And it's a very personal relationship. So, yeah, I think it's really great that you have all these different ways of getting to the understanding of people and helping them understand themselves. But, yeah, you've got to find the way that works best for you.
Yeah. And then moving on from coaching to leadership, maybe tell us a few things that you've learned in your time as a leader that have stuck with you.
Gosh, big question. I think for me, I've seen leaders that have so charismatic. They've really. I've got this vision of a leader I used to work with, who really commanding the room, big room, and everyone's really there and involved and excited, and it was so amazing to watch. That's also not me, and that's never going to be me. So I think it's about finding your own style and understanding what it is to be a leader in your own body and in your own way. For me, that's about being really clear about what you're trying to achieve as an organization, how you go about that. So what are your values? How do you operate? How do you conduct yourselves? How do you talk? And then building that team around you, getting that right cast. I mean, that's so important to have the right people in the right roles. And being really clear about what their roles are. So, they know what they're up to and what they need to go and do. And then giving them the autonomy to go and do it. But also giving them that safe space. I think that's so important because we are at our best when we're testing the boundaries, when we're taking risks. And you need to be able to do that in a safe environment. So sort of creating that safe place where you can fail, but that's fail fast and you move on.
And how any advice for creating that space?
I think it's about, you have to go really deep. I think you have to find that way to be really emotionally connected, to be really vulnerable with each other and sort of be really clear that this is who I am. This is me. This is what I'm great at. This is what I'm not so great at, and this is where I need help and support. And I think having those deep emotional relationships with your team is really important, and that takes vulnerability, and that needs to come from the leader first. And then I think once you've developed that, then it's like, okay, well, as a team, as a group of people, what can we only do as a team? What do we need each other for to go and deliver or get?
Mm.
And then, making that as optimal as possible. How do you really optimize what you're doing? And then go be brave, like get bigger with it. Like, okay, so we've done this. Let's go and do something really meaty and big and ambitious. And let's go and sort of see what we can do together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sort of journey of going on that together is really important. But you have to have those connections. You have to sort of be able to sort of know where you each support each other or are needed with each other and what your role is. My business partner and I are very different. We know where we overlap and we do really well, but we also know our individual roles with each other so that, they call me out and I call them out. And that's built on a lot of trust and, history.
Do you use sort of more of a testing scenario like a Hogan? Have you done that with your business partner or other tools to really understand that and then talk through it? And is that something you generally sort of recommend to teams that you're working with or, leadership teams as well?
Definitely. I've definitely used Hogan in the past with my teams. And I think that really creates an understanding. I think both of individuals, sometimes I think they're usually not surprised, but I think sometimes they can be a little bit surprised about some of the results, which in itself is something interesting to explore. But I think that real, so when you get those sort of sharing of results, maybe putting them up on a graph or some sort of diagrammatic version of it, you can see where you all sit. And I think it's really important to understand that. And that really helps ask some interesting questions. And it's a facilitation for a conversation of, oh, that's why you do that. Or, oh, so if I do that, does that mean you feel like this? And, I think really asking those sort of, key questions, 'cause it's not just about who you are, but it's about how you respond to things and how, therefore, you might change your language with each other. There's been so many occasions when people have made assumptions because of, they sort of see things through their lenses, not through your lenses. And so then you're like, they've completely misunderstood a situation or how you've responded. And I think to be able to have something where you can talk about it and explore it in more detail is really important and interesting. I was on a boat on the boat race. We didn't do Hogan, sadly, which would have been fascinating. But we did do sort of one of those, the wheels, and we worked out that we had one completer finisher, and everyone else wanted to be a leader. And that's really not what you want on a boat when you're stuck in the middle of an ocean. Like that completer finisher was the most important member of our team at many moments, and we said we can never lose them from the team. That's why we completely scuppered. So knowing what you're all like, I think is quite important to understand.
That diversity piece is something that we talk about with a lot of leaders in terms of creating diverse teams and diverse thinkers, but it is still often missed in business, isn't it? Where people do hire in their own light and they get people around them that they all get on really well, but then there's this real lack of different ideas and different ways of thinking.
Completely. And it's, even if you think about a board, those roles, the operations director and the finance director and the HR director and the sales director, they're already got very different skill sets and different ways of approaching. So there should be diversity because you can't run a business all in one way. And then you just need to bring that diversity in other ways. As you say, there's no one way of solving a problem. You need the different ways of thinking about it, approaching it. It's really important. And your customer base isn't going to be uniform. There's going to be huge diversity about that too. I think diversity of thought is just so important, and diversity of approach. And it's such a shame when we see people hiring, a mirror image of what you've already got or what they feel comfortable with. And I think that, having that sort of difference of opinion and that ability to explore those differences in a really constructive way only gets you to a better answer. I mean, we sort of talk about in the business I work in, we have very different ways of approaching things. We have very different conversations, but we always come to a better place at the end of it. We're always, grateful for having those sort of difficult conversations.
I was just going to say, it's interesting, isn't it? In coaching, talk about critical moments in coaching, and critical moments tend to happen when there is maybe that point of tension and things are happening in the conversation rather than it just being question and answer. And I guess what you're saying there is exactly the same in a boardroom or in a business. You're trying to create some form of tension to create critical moments that lead you to a better place in some way.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. And I think I think that's something that actually comes really naturally to some people, but not naturally to others. And I definitely didn't come naturally to me. But that is really where the good stuff comes.
Mm.
Now, that's when it gets really interesting, and you start having very, interesting conversations that lead you in a place perhaps you didn't even, anticipate. But yeah, that those moments are just so important.
Can you? Is it easy to create? Do you think a safe space for those conversations to happen? Is it as much about introducing the scenario to say, look, guys, this is going to be an uncomfortable meeting, but we all know it's going to be uncomfortable, so that people don't become defensive? Because I think it's very easy, isn't it, with certain personalities and certain people, that everyone needs permission to challenge and to feel uncomfortable,
Yeah.
particularly around certain personalities. And
Yes.
have you sort of found ways of doing that and creating that?
Firstly, I agree with you entirely. And I think it's really easy to say it, and then I think you've got to live it. And that's where it becomes really difficult. So I think, there can be an intention of a safe space, but how you then respond in the moment is actually, so as always, it's the doing's much harder and more important than the saying. And if you mess that up, then you take away all the security and all the safety, and everyone sort of goes back to their original ways of being. So I think it can't just be an idea that a leader has or someone has. It has to be something the whole group signs up to and understands their role they can play, and can understand how their actions speak as loudly as their words. So I think first that's really important, and I agree entirely. And I've completely forgotten what the question was. I'm very sorry, in a really
No, I
uncoaching
think
way.
genuinely, it was just about finding those ways to set the scene for that conversation. I think, as you said earlier, and I think Sinek,
Yeah.
however he wants to pronounce it, talks about this a lot in terms of creating the safe space for difficulty and asking permission.
Yeah.
Oh, Shonagh, do you mind if I ask you quite an uncomfortable question? And then as
Yes.
soon as someone says, yes, that's okay,
Yeah.
you've set the scene for it and they know it's coming, rather than just asking them something that makes them feel very defensive and edgy without, or puts them on edge without permission.
Yeah.
And so I think that's maybe is the answer, isn't it? It's just getting consent for that more difficult environment.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's really interesting hearing you talk about it that way. I think one-on-one, they're the beautiful ways in which you can introduce it. And I think that, asking that permission, letting people know that that's, and they can say no, they haven't got to say yes, but, understanding what's coming, but understanding that you're respecting the situation, you understand how it might land. I find it much more interesting as well when you get to a group dynamic, when there's much more at play, and establishing it there can be much harder. But again, as you say, establishing the rules, saying what you're trying to achieve, why you're trying to achieve it, having ways in which you're going to act, and then ways in which, if things don't go quite right, how, you can correct it. And sort of, so giving people the rules and the ways to play can really sort of create that space.
How do you go about? We talked a bit about there about the emotional bit, vulnerability. How do you balance that bit with the cold hard facts and numbers and truths that obviously in business at times have to be balanced off?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, as a leader, you choose your style, don't you? But I think there's very much about this sort of piece of balancing, you say, that direction, that leadership, everyone trusting in you, you not having vulnerabilities, you not looking weak, you not looking soft, and being able to make hard decisions, but do it in a very human way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, obviously there's the element of running a business and the numbers and how you do that. And then there's making very difficult decisions, but doing that quickly and thoughtfully and humanly.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as you say, to another group of people, being, creating a safe space for them so that they can really work with you and follow you. And I think, it's a balance. And, people don't get that right. Lots of people don't get that right. Some people are, hard and cold and amazingly functional and brilliant. And some are perhaps seen as a bit soft and perhaps not these charismatic leaders you want to follow. So I think, where you lie on that scale is really important, and how you want to be seen. And I think that's why you're looking back and seeing, examples of what worked really well and what didn't work really well, and knowing that you're different to those people. So how do you take the bits you like and perhaps rule out the bits you don't like, or don't want to be like, and try and sort of find your own version of that, and work through that.
Yeah.
And it's a continually evolving thing. I think as you get older, as you get more experience, as you see different things, that's going to change. And that's really important to go on that. Be open to that change.
You've hired a lot of different types of people over your career.
I have.
We talked about a little bit around diversity there, and also getting the right people around you in that leadership team. Have you got any tips and hacks or rules in some respect that you follow now when trying to ensure that you are hiring the right person, even though we know if we get it 8 times out of 10 right, it's probably not too bad. But have you got any things that you sort of follow to this day when you're hiring?
I think it depends on the situation.
Yep.
But I think, first of all, it's about casting that net as wide as possible. And I think really working with the right partner to go and find people that look a bit different to perhaps what you're anticipating, people with different experiences, different backgrounds. Maybe they don't come from an obvious company. Maybe they're trying to transition into a different role. And it's more about the potential rather than the history. So for me, it's about challenging my own thinking about what I think I want in that role. And perhaps bringing quite an interesting long list, which makes me think and challenge what I thought I wanted. And I think having a partner that can spar with me a bit and go, well, I put this person in for this reason, and I think you should really meet them because I think they're going to add this to your organisation. And that really helps, again, open up that conversation about thinking about what I want and what I need. I think it's always really important to have an element of that cultural fit. So it depends on the organisational size, but we used to, when I worked for a much smaller business, we always used to send out the candidates for a coffee with people that would be their peers. And, that was a chance, I always say that an interview is a chance for you to interview us as much as us to interview you. It's a two-way street. And we have to be the right fit for you. We have to be offering you the right role and experience and opportunity. And I always find this fascinating what came out of those, because people suddenly are in a much more social environment. It's feels less like an interview. And the things that would come out of those were just amazing, both in terms of new learnings, ways people handled themselves, what people said, that culture fit of people saying this person's not going to work here for these reasons, and them having a sort of a bit of a say in it made a real difference of the buy-in for the team of the people that came in later. Yeah, so I always find those coffees.
Yeah.
Also, there's a wonderful story that I don't think it's particularly new, but I always used to love it. Was the receptionist at a large company I used to work for was always the last member of the recruitment team, because how that person conducted themselves, both with them, but also whilst in the sort of the reception area, said so much.
Yep.
And we'd always go and ask her what her experience with that person was, and sort of, yeah, that to me is as important as what their CV says and what their references.
Yeah. And in terms of the sparring partner piece that you mentioned, is that from a search firm recruiter experience and relationship, that's a key part of a trusted partner's toolkit, is to be able to say to you, yeah, but
yes,
have you thought about this? Have you looked at this different? Instead of going, yes, ma'am, 3 bags full.
Oh, completely. Yeah, because when you're doing a search for us, you're an extension of us. You are representing us out in the market. So we need to be really good at briefing you about who we are and what we're like and what we're looking for. But then I'm using your expertise to come back and go, right, well, I took the brief, I understood who you are, I know what you're looking for. Let me give you the best candidates I can possibly find for this role. And here's the reason why I'm presenting them to you. And I really opened someone that said, got someone a bit left field here, but you should give it a try for a reason. And even if that left field person is not the one that comes in eventually, they'll have definitely changed my thinking in terms of what I'm looking for and who I eventually recruit. So yeah, I think, it's really key, that relationship. And back to that whole kind of difficult conversations and the moments of interest and change come when you have those more gnarly conversations. You want someone that's going to present some information that sort of makes you think. And,
I think it's still a minority position, though, from what we see. Most people come out with a very prescriptive list and tick box, particularly in the times we find ourselves in now, which is many people displaced through redundancy, the recent economic climate, technology, etc., feel like they've got a choice of everyone and anyone. So then they end up going, well, this is the exact person we want. I'm not going to see anyone outside of that. And you go, and inherently a lot of people are risk averse, and so they revert to that. But we don't see a lot of people going, oh yes, please do send me your picks and your wild cards that might challenge my thinking.
I think it's a shame. I think you miss out. I think that you'll never know what you didn't know. And I think we're less rich for it. I'll always have and I'm someone that's probably been the wild card, actually. So maybe part of my experience and my background is the one that I was the one going, please give me a try. I am a bit different. I'm not the one that has that classic skill set or has come through this particular department, but I've got these other characteristics. And my sense is whenever someone goes to a new job, they never got everything. I mean, there's usually something they're trying to learn. There's usually something they're trying to do differently. So maybe they've moved from a large organisation to a small, or maybe they're stepping up into a new, more senior role and they haven't managed people before, or whatever it might be, at whatever level. I think we're always stepping into a new role because it brings a new challenge to us as individuals. So therefore, it's unlikely that any candidate has every box ticked. You're always taking a little bit of a risk. So maybe just take a risk on something you weren't anticipating taking a risk on.
Would love to get your thoughts as well on having gone small company, one of the biggest companies, back to small or mid or SME size businesses. What are the shifts that you've had to make operating in those different sized organizations? Because we speak to a lot of people who are kind of trying to potentially move out of big corporate in 2025 to something smaller. For many reasons: purpose, promise of equity, wealth creation, or just wanting to get their arms around something totally, rather than being sort of in a narrower role in a big corporate.
I mean, I'm probably highly biased, but my sense is that I think just being really honest with yourself, I think they are very different environments, and I completely get the attraction. I mean, clearly I must be in love with smaller businesses, but they are very different, and not everyone will be happy there. I think that, the reasons they're probably very exciting and enticing are also the reasons they're possibly very difficult. So there's nowhere to hide. You are going to be working with less resources, be that people, be that money, be that systems, processes. It's probably going to be less hierarchical, more dynamic. People have more autonomy. But then if you get it wrong, then there's nowhere to hide, and the buck definitely stops with you. You're probably much closer to the people who are literally invested in the business, and therefore the expectations are much closer. They're going to have big asks of the team and can be very demanding. You're probably going to be doing jobs that you could have done 20 years ago because, there's not enough people to sort of do everything. But it's exciting and fast-paced, and there's going to be challenges left, right and centre. And it's kind of addictive. So I get it, but also that's not everybody. You know, you haven't necessarily got an HR department or a finance team or the resources to help you as you had before. It's probably a lot more fluid, you know, less hierarchical, less structured, and that doesn't suit everybody. And whilst there are definitely people out there that can make a lot of money from these businesses, there's an awful lot of people that never do. But up to you and the individual of whether that's going to be right for you or not. But
Yeah.
I definitely get the excitement and I love it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of people that have gone from large organisations to small and not lasted very long.
I was just going to say, I definitely think that through coaching, and I'm sure you've seen this with people that you've talked to, if their frustrations, if their challenges are things around, don't feel like I've got influence, I can't make a change, things are too slow, and they're just genuinely, clearly very unhappy with their current state. I guess there's always signs that you can ask the questions to see if actually, are they just in the wrong space? Maybe they did their chartered accountancy in Big Four, they've joined a graduate scheme at a massive corporate, but actually they absolutely hate it. And then when
Yeah.
you unpick that, I guess you start to discover, well, actually, maybe this is the problem. You
Yeah.
need to go and do this. And I guess because you've worked in big and small and be able to identify those feelings, those traits that people are having.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also it's a very long time since I left university. I feel quite disconnected to it now, although I've got family members going through it. But, you know, back in the day, you did the milk round. And so people went into these big organisations. That was the track, wasn't it? You kind of left university, you went into a nice big graduate scheme in a big corporation and you lived that life. That's what it was. And it was definitely less, there was definitely different world. But there was less opportunity to go into smaller businesses, small organizations. And obviously that's available now. But yeah, you could very easily find yourself in a place where it wasn't a good fit, but that seemed the thing to go and do. And as you say, through the coaching, you can see quite quickly that maybe what seemed a good idea at 21 or 22 isn't really necessarily the right fit for you. And there's another way of going and doing it. And even in big companies, there can be other ways of doing it. I was in a big, you know, FTSE 100 business, but I was always on the edge of it. We were always in the new, exciting bit. I was always in the bit that was developing or having new challenges in it. So I had this luxury of being in a business whereby I had the support, the hierarchy, the structures, the money to go and do some big changes whilst sort of acting on the edges and in a really dynamic and exciting way. So, you know, it's not to say that they're all the same and all big jobs are stayed and in the same environment at all. That's just not true. Yeah.
Obviously, the world's changed a lot since that sort of entry point into the workplace
Yeah.
today. I mean, we've seen that recently, having done a little bit of hiring for ourselves at a more entry level, particularly with AI and everything going on. Do you have any thoughts on where people at the beginning of their careers should be sort of thinking about a bit of strategy at the start of their career now that things have changed?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a bloodbath out there for at so many levels, but
Yeah.
definitely on the graduate level. And I think the opportunities to get your first career is so hard. And I think it's about just being open and exploring. For me, I think it's about, you know, having an idea about what you may or may not want to go and do, knowing what you're like and what might suit you, but just going and try. You know, just going out there and perhaps taking an opportunity where you didn't think you would end up, or, you know, seeing a role that's advertised and go, I'll give that a try. Because I think until you really get going, it's really hard to know. And I think just try and get any opportunity you can.
Yeah.
You know, we've taken on interns, we've had people, and the biggest advice we just write to people.
Yeah.
You know, just what companies do you like? Who you're interested in? You know, what products are in your bedroom or in your house that you really like? And just write to them. You know, make contact I mean, that shows so many skills
Yeah.
right there and then. And, even
I
if they
think
don't
that's
say
great.
anything, they might just bring you in for some, a coffee, or, there might be an internship that's coming later. I just try.
It's such a simple, great piece of advice. Even speaking to far more senior and even executive level people, saying, there's too many people relying on LinkedIn easy apply button,
Yeah.
which has arguably made things worse, not better
Mm.
in some respects. But people do not write nice, personalized, tailored, punchy emails to people who might be hiring.
No.
And when you're on the receiving end of that, and when you're on the receiving end of a lot of LinkedIn, that can cut through if it's done nicely
Yeah.
and thoughtfully to that person. I know I feel an obligation as an employer that I have to reply to that.
Yeah.
Not everyone's going to, and people are busy, but I think you've got a lot more chance than some of the other methods, and not many people do it at all levels. It's bonkers.
And it can be really hard to do. It's scary. And, not hearing back is horrible. But it's just going to happen, but you've lost nothing. And I think the other thing to say is that it can take a while for that to kind of come through. It's like any network, isn't it? Like, you never quite know where the next thing's going to come through. Maybe the person you wrote to isn't the person that's going to offer you something, but someone says to them, do you know anyone that might be good at this? And you're like, oh, this person wrote to me and you should have a chat to them. Or I've had something recently, it's come back to me 2 years later. I wrote to someone 2 years ago, it came to nothing. I was a bit disappointed, I thought nothing of it. And now they've written back to me going, I want to talk to you about this opportunity. And I'm like, really? Like 2 years later? But you just don't know where it's going to land. And if nothing else, I think just you feel a bit more in control of it. You're not waiting for someone to come and, knock on your door. You're taking active control, and you just have no idea where that's going to end up.
I was just going to say, I feel like most of what we look for, and I think a really important trait in this year in 2025, but also into the future, is just going to be being really, really super inquisitive. So I'll always ask the question in an interview now, what are you playing with in AI? What have you messed around with? Have you used an LLM? Have you played around with it? Because for me anyway, look, we know that AI is going to disrupt the world. The employment world is going to change, and you need to be thinking about how you can utilize these skills, because inevitably when you join the workforce as someone junior or as business leaders, we're hopefully relatively early adopters of some of the things that you can do in this space. You absolutely have to be inquisitive to go, well, I'm just going to try something. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And that for me is just such an important trait. Are you inquisitive? Are you, inquisitive to the point where you go, I'm really interested in this business, so I'm going to find the 3 or 4 people, I'm going to connect them in LinkedIn, and I'm going to send them that personal message. And like for me, that's the one trait that sets particularly people at the junior level apart from each other, is how inquisitive they are to go and find stuff, go and fix things, create solutions. I mean, we're a startup, right? So we need that trait. But I think in any business, that's a super important skill.
Yeah. And bringing those ideas to the business. I think sometimes I think at a junior level, it can feel quite, I'm going to give them some work and I'll get on and do it. But actually, you want that voice at the table. You want them to have ideas. I was watching this clip from Tom Hanks this week, which was, the best advice ever been given. He's like, show up on time, know your lines, and have an idea. And, and I think that's it. We recently had someone come and work for us at the company at, and they just love doing videos. So in their personal life, they did loads and loads of videos. They were on Instagram, creating really fun, different, interesting, engaging videos. And they completely transformed our social media, just because they were into it and they enjoyed it. And they came and they said, have you thought about doing this? What about that? I've just done a video over here. What do you think of it? And they've just gone off and done it themselves.
Right.
And we're like, that's brilliant. Put it on our Instagram account. So I think, find the thing you love, find the thing you're good at, and find a way of exploiting it. I know it's not that easy, but I think you've got to make your own way. Like no one is going to have as much invested in your career as yourself. No one. And people will give you duff advice and bum steers because maybe it doesn't suit them for you to leave the role. Maybe there's a reason why they're going to influence you, not for your benefit, but for theirs. You've just got to take control. You've got to be brave. You've got to make some really big decisions. You've got to go out there and just put yourself out there and see what happens.
Yeah. And it's as we've said, it's very difficult at the moment, but equally there's a lot of things that we didn't used to have. I mean, if you want to know how to do something, you can go on YouTube and find out how to do it.
Yeah.
If you want to find someone, nearly 1.1 billion people are on LinkedIn now, and actually 98% of people's email addresses are one of 3 or 4 domains.
Yeah.
So there's things that can be done, and they're quite basic.
They really are. And kind of what business, isn't it? Like, you have a product and you're trying to sell it. So who's your customer group? What are you trying to sell? And how do you go and do that? And I mean, maybe that's not what everyone's doing, but that's kind of where I approach things from. So, as an individual, you're no different. Here I am, here's what I can offer, and here's why you should, invest in me.
How important has network been to you in your career?
Huge. But I think unexpectedly, for me, it's really important in lots of different ways. I think one is there's a network for new opportunity. So, reaching out to people and meeting them and seeing where that leads in terms of, jobs. But I think more importantly, it's about businesses are forever changing. And as you get to a really senior level, you've got to have new ideas and learn from the best and see how other people are doing things. And so for me, it's been huge in terms of going out and meeting people who are doing things in similar companies, but very different companies, and trying to take what they're doing and learn from that. Maybe they're going to be a partner of the future. Maybe they've invested in a system that I think is going to be really great and transform the way we do business. Maybe they've learned about something that I want to learn about. And also peers, people that are doing a similar role to you, and can be that support and advice and just someone to turn to when you've got a question or a problem or want to just have a coffee. So I think network is huge for so many different reasons. And you never know where it's going to end, and I use my network for other people, so you say, like, people are often asking me, do I know somebody like this? And I'll pass on details, and, you just have no idea who's talking to whom and what that's going to end up doing.
I think actually that's a really important point. I think it's probably one of the most undervalued things as you go through your career is to be incredibly almost unselfish and just connect people. Like, it's not about a favor for a favor. It's just give kindly and knowing that at some point, hopefully it will come back to you, but you should never expect it.
No, exactly. I think, and it's real delight to be able to connect to people. It's such a lovely email to send going, hi, can I introduce you to this person? They're great for this reason, and you're great for this reason, and I think you're going to get on really well. And, I hope I hear how it goes, but I don't need to. But it's just such a lovely email to write. I think the other advice I give to people, especially earlier on in their career, but it stands for everybody, people love to help. I mean, maybe you haven't got time, maybe you're really busy, but people love to help other people. Even if that's like an introduction. I see you know that person. Would you mind introducing me? Or have you got time for a coffee? I'd love to talk to you about this. I think I wish I'd known that earlier. I wish I'd known earlier in my career that people would be happy to help. Those senior women that I saw, I really respected. I would have loved to have gone for a coffee with some of them and gone, just tell me what it was like. Tell me what you learned. Tell me what I should think about. Tell me, if you and me, what would you go and do? Like, I wish I knew that when I was,
It's actually one of the, I think from our executive career workshops that we do, it's one of the most important things that we say to people is exactly that. It's, look, connect to people on LinkedIn. They may not always accept, but connect to people that you'd be interested in having a coffee with, and just ask them if they've got time for a 20-minute virtual conversation. Say that you're looking for some advice in your career, or say that you're looking for advice on something that that they can give you, and see if that works. Because actually people, as you say, they want to help, they want to give advice, and 20 minutes of that time, that's your 20 minutes to talk to them, but maybe to spark a relationship that could lead to something else and maybe a job. So
or an introduction to somebody else, or I this is so true. And I think the point you make is, have a question. Like, it's really hard to respond to nothing. So, be brave, ask a question, because then I can respond to that. It's much easier for me to see why you connected to me, and what you'd like from me, and I'll see if I can help. But if you just connect to me and it's like, well, A, I might not connect back because who are you? Why have you connected to me? And B, oh, you've connected to me, great, and it just sits there. Nothing happens from it. So I think, again, you're right. Be pointed, know what you want to get from it, and be brave and ask. Yeah.
I was thinking back to your kind of earlier point generally about your career, and kind of saying, well, it was a bit here, there, different places. Have you kind of almost reflected on things that have stayed true in terms of, have you had almost like a purpose and a value set that's kind of stayed with you throughout, that's led those decisions? Have you had that kind of planning phase to your career? Because I guess I'd say as a coach, you'd probably recommend that people think about where they want to be in some way, and you plan back from it. It doesn't sound like you did that, but you're now much more strategic about how you think about maybe the next phase of your life as you've kind of evolved through your career.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I definitely do that personally. I remember being really struck by, someone saying, think about waking up on your 80th birthday and looking at your toes and, looking back on your life and what did you achieve? And that really struck with me. And I've been very clear personally about doing that, which is probably the opposite to most people. I think lots of people have a very clear career idea and go after it and chase it. And actually the personal thing just sort of happens on the side. And probably quite typically for me, it's the other way around. I think for me, it's about, it's interesting. I think I have an overall idea, and as I've got older, that's definitely changed, in terms of what I'm looking for, what's important to me, what I want to get out of it. But I also have that other bit of coaching, which is the exploration. So it's not a fixed idea. It's not a definite destination. It's like, let me go and explore and see where this leads. And that might be more interesting than what I originally thought about. So I think for me, I've definitely got something 5-year and 10-year in my thinking of what I want to do. When I speak to businesses, I definitely look for certain elements to what they're trying to achieve. I can be quite clear about what the role might be or the kind of company might be. There's always that little bit of, back to the recruiting people or the themes that have come out throughout this conversation, there's always a bit of a chance for something from the left field to come out and take me by surprise and see what happens. So I've got better at it, I think is the answer. And I think I've seen it's way back when I had the boat race. So much of my life was controlled by that. I had this, it was 4 years away when I first got my place to take part in it. It was a huge financial commitment. It was obviously going to disrupt my career. I had to be physically fit to take part, and I had to be able to sail, which I couldn't do when I signed up to do the race. So there was a very clear set of objectives, and every single decision I made in my life on those 4 years was starting with the point of, will this help or hinder me getting on the boat race? And to have that clear vision and that clear delivery point, I suppose, made life so simple. And I was like, oh, if I could only have this in every element of my life, this would be brilliant. So I've tried to do it to an extent with my career since then.
Yeah.
Because it's just so easy and helpful. But I say, always keeping that door a little bit ajar just in case something comes along, which in my case it usually does.
Yeah. And interesting, we were talking about that in terms of if you'd broken your leg the week before you were due to go on the boat race or whatever, that would have absolutely devastated you because you were so invested in it. And so having that optionality and thinking that this is not the be all and end all, and keeping that in mind is also really important, isn't it? So having a diversity of things that
it really is, and yeah, exactly, being open to, okay, well, that's what I imagined it's going to be, and it's not going to be that, and that happens all the time in life. You have to be flexible and just take the positive from it, I suppose, where you can.
Thank you, Shonagh. It's been great talking. Final point today. What's energizing you at the moment, either sort of professionally or personally?
So the businesses that I'm involved in right now are all sort of in real inflection moments. So there's really big changes coming with them, and that really excites me. So we've got big plans afoot. We're perhaps changing strategy in one case. We've got big people changes in another. Lots to go and deliver. Lots of changes. Really energizing. Really exciting. And on the coaching side, again, I'm just always energized by working with people, and seeing who's the next people I work with and how I can help them. Always energizing. Always love it. So yeah, lots of change afoot in 2025, and looking forward to seeing what comes.
Super. And for anyone who's happens to be listening or watching, okay, if they were to contact you directly, if they were interested in just discussing coaching, or the possibilities.
Yeah, I've got to practice my pitch. You can't say go out there and connect with people and
Yeah.
message them and ask them a question or for help,
Yeah.
and then say actually no, absolutely. Yeah, I've got a pretty unusual name. I'm pretty easy to find. So yeah, very much so.
And we're not Stephen Bartlett just yet, so I imagine there won't be that many inquiries.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, thank you. Absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Thanks,
Really
Shonagh.
appreciate it.